Welcome back, kiddos. It's me. And today we're answering a super scientific, kind of philosophical question. What animal can live forever? And before you say humans, just wait. Because although nobody has actually lived forever, there is an animal out there that seems to have figured it out. So what could it be? A vampire bat? Nah, those guys don't even live all that long. How about a sea turtle? Not that one either. They max out at around 100 years. Okay, then how about our oldest living animal, this guy? Wrong again. This Galapagos giant tortoise has only been around for 196 years. And even though 196 years is a seriously impressive lifespan, that's nothing compared to the true champion. What if I told you there's an animal that might never die? No vampire, no magic, just jellyfish. And not just any jellyfish, mind you, but one particular kind known as the Tortopsis dorni, aka the Immortal jellyfish. Now, you might be thinking this animal probably doesn't deserve the title of living forever because it is a tiny little invertebrate. I mean, would you trade places with this thing? Probably not, but trust me, it's way cooler than it looks. 'Cause here's the deal. When it gets injured, sick, or just really, really old, it reverses aging. Say that again. Yeah, it hits undo on life. Like if you were walking down the street and suddenly felt yourself turn younger, you'd probably freak out. But this jellyfish does it on purpose. And the reason why is pretty straightforward. It's basically the evolutionary equivalent of copy and paste. See, when our cells divide, they replicate our DNA and then split it between two new cells. With each division, the telomeres at the ends of their chromosomes get shorter and shorter until eventually they reach too short to keep the cell going. And that marks the end of the cell's lifespan and the beginning of, well, aging. The immortal jellyfish, though, divides its cells in a way that keeps its telomeres nice and long, so its cells never get too old to keep dividing. In other words, it can theoretically repeat its current body stage forever. But first, let's rewind a bit to explain how this whole thing starts. Immortal jellyfish start off like most other jellyfish as free-floating, stinging cells called polyps. As they grow, they bud off from their polyp colony to go off on their own. Eventually, they form a dome-shaped bell and tentacles and become adult medusae. At this point, they're essentially doing the same things jellyfish do, floating through the ocean and stinging people who swim too close. So far, so normal, right? Well, after spending some time as an adult, the immortal jellyfish will hit the undo button. First, they start shrinking, which makes them look like shriveled pieces of fruit. Then their bodies twist and turn, and over the course of a few days, they revert back to being a polyp, essentially turning themselves into babies. Now, at this stage, you might think the immortal jellyfish is done living forever and just wants to call it quits. But that's not the case. In fact, instead of dying, it transforms back into a polyp and grows up into a brand new jellyfish. Only this time it's a clone of the previous one. See, when it reversed the aging process, it also replicated its own DNA and pasted it into its new clone. So this new jellyfish is genetically identical to the one that came before. And this means that technically, the immortal jellyfish can repeat this cycle forever. And while this might seem like a totally fantastical superpower, it's actually a super useful one. Even though the immortal jellyfish can reverse age indefinitely, it's still vulnerable to being eaten or getting poked by a shrimp. So having a backup body to fall back on whenever it gets hurt is super helpful. In fact, it's so effective that it's basically the equivalent of having infinite lives in a video game. Now, you might be thinking this sounds like an awesome ability to have, and I don't know, maybe it is. But it comes with one major downside. To make a backup copy of itself, the immortal jellyfish has to use up a ton of energy, and that leaves it vulnerable to starvation. If food is scarce, the immortal jellyfish won't have enough energy to make another copy of itself, and we'll just have to hope it doesn't get killed before it does. And unfortunately for this species, researchers have found that they tend to live in areas where food isn't always plentiful. So most immortal jellyfish don't live forever. They just live until they starve. In fact, according to one study conducted in 2008, less than 5% of the immortal jellyfish in the wild are over the age of 2. So if these guys are supposed to be immortal, why do they have such short lifespans? Well, remember that this species tends to live in areas where food is scarce. So sometimes it just isn't possible to clone itself. But in labs where food is always around, researchers have seen immortal jellyfish clones live for months and months without dying. So although we've only been observing these guys for about 30 years, there's a chance that if we observe them long enough, we'd see one live forever. So it goes without saying, but I'm gonna say it anyway. The immortal jellyfish is the real MVP of the ocean. In fact, it's the only known animal capable of reversing the aging process. So scientists are understandably obsessed with figuring out exactly how it does that. They've pinpointed several genes that play a part in the immortal jellyfish's reversal process, including one called Peewee. That gene helps maintain the ends of the jellyfish's chromosomes and prevent them from shortening. But even though science is getting closer to understanding exactly how the immortal jellyfish lives forever, we're not quite there yet. Plus, even if we do figure it out, that doesn't mean it'll work on us. After all, we're bigger, more complex animals. So the aging process might be a bit different. And not to mention, just because science can do something doesn't mean it should. For example, in 2012, researchers figured out how to turn off the genes responsible for aging in nematodes, but I wouldn't exactly line up to try that out myself. Still, the immortal jellyfish as unique biology could help us find ways to combat diseases that affect elderly people or even extend healthy lifespan. In fact, one team of scientists thinks that combining the Peewee gene from the immortal jellyfish with other anti-aging genes might be able to extend human lifespan by 5 years. So even if the immortal jellyfish can't live forever, it might help us come a little bit closer. But for now, jellyfish, 1, humans, 0. So the next time you're at the beach and see a jellyfish floating past, be respectful. It might be older than your great-great-grandpa. Thanks for watching, you immortal weirdo. And thanks for asking such a great question. Ask us anything using the link below, and we might feature your question in the upcoming episode. Until then, like and subscribe. Unless you're already immortal too. In that case, just sit back and enjoy the ride.